Here we go. Well, most of you know that before I was a priest, I was a school teacher, but before I sort of changed careers, I did consider maybe the church wasn't really where I was called, and I actually thought about becoming a lawyer, of all things, briefly. Now, my friend was supposed to be here today, and I was going to tell a bit of a story about he and I sitting in legal studies in Year 12 when we were supposed to be learning about the law, but we were learning all sorts of other things, usually about religion. So I would be picking up books about religions and reading that, or the Cold War, or all sorts of other things while we were supposed to be studying our legal textbook. When he's here, God willing, in 2 weeks, I'll repeat the story, so pretend you haven't heard it. Anyway, we're still friends today from that. But I was fascinated at that time about how the law works. And now that I'm a little bit older, and I sort of considered that as a career path, and now I've got some theological study as well, I've come to notice how much of what we call the common law, the law of Australia, the law that's outside these doors, because the church has its own laws as well, the law outside there reflects so much of our Christian life and our Christian values. The thing with common law, if you go to any country that was in the former British Empire, they practice common law. And the thing about common law is that it's based on something called precedent. So any of the lawyers out there are going, yes, Reverend Kim, I know that. But precedent allows judges to look at earlier cases and go, oh, okay, so we've got a similar case here today. How am I going to prosecute this, or how am I going to lay a charge, and so on and so forth. So they're looking at earlier decisions to inform their current decisions in the court. It's actually a really beautiful system. There's other countries that have different styles of law. There's something called civil law on the continent of Europe, which is a bit different. But common law actually does a few things. It has restraint on power, so judges don't have too much power, and Parliament doesn't have too much power, and the Prime Minister, in our case, doesn't have too much power. It's all spread out. So that keeps things fair. The other thing is, it saves judges a lot of time, because they can actually go back and look at other cases. So if you go in a lawyer's office and it's full of books, it's full of case law, so they're looking up precedents that say, oh, that's what the judge applied in this case from years and years ago. Now, sometimes law looks to theology. And if you remember from a couple of weeks ago, theology is simply the study of God. Theos is the Greek word for God. Ology is the word for study of God, theology. So sometimes the law will look to theology because theology is older. It's actually the oldest discipline in the world. It used to be called the Queen of Sciences. It was the only thing taught in universities for thousands of years until, today's a little bit different, but theology is the oldest discipline. So the law would often look back to theology to inform itself. And a very famous case called Donahue and Stevenson in 1932 was from England in the House of Lords. And that's where we get our modern law of negligence. So we understand negligence through that. And the judge in that case, who was from the House of Lords, a bit different in England. The House of Lords can hear things and make case decisions. Lord Atkins said, we actually need to consider, who is my neighbour? Who is my neighbour when I am manufacturing, it was a ginger beer case, when I am manufacturing ginger beer, who do I have an obligation to look after here? So it became the law of negligence. To whom do I owe a duty of care? Because that law hadn't been established before. There wasn't actually a precedent for negligence in the same way before Donahue and Stevenson. That's why it's an important case. But it looked to the church. It looked to Jesus, actually, who taught about love your neighbour as yourself. Now, I tell you this stuff for a reason. It's not just a legal lecture, promise you. I'm not that versed in law to give you a legal lecture. But when we do robust theology, which we do here at All Saints, we don't take the scriptures we've just heard as just kind of floating in a vacuum. Now, the lectionary gives us readings every week, but they're not just randomly chosen. They're chosen for a purpose. They all link together. The Bible isn't just 66 little books between two chapters. It is one unified story of Jesus and our relationship with him. It's just hard to see sometimes when you're looking back at other scriptures. But the good news for you is that you have me and the other clergy to help you see that stuff, because if you're not looking for it, you might not know it's there, and that's okay. Not everyone has the time to sit through and pore over the scriptures. That's why you come to church. You get me to do it for you. So we look at our common law system and look at precedent, right? It's the same with the scripture. We're looking at these readings and going, right, what's coming before? And what do we see revealed in Jesus? Now, that long reading that Janet had the joy of reading with all the fun names in it, the Exodus reading, Exodus is older. It's the oldest reading in that series that we've got today. It's from the Old Testament. And if you've seen the Charlton Heston movie, The 10 Commandments, you probably all have, that's the story of it. That's what's being told in that movie. In Matthew's, it's the beginning of a much bigger story, okay? So it's included today as a precedent, if we use the word of the law. It's a precedent because we actually then get to Matthew's gospel, which is still old, but it's younger than Exodus, and we see that what's going on in Matthew's gospel and what's going on in Exodus is the precedent for Matthew's gospel, because we understand that Jesus is a new and better Moses. He's the new Moses, the Moses who has come to do it right the second time around. Because if you know the story of Exodus or you've watched the movie, Moses is not perfect. He does not have a perfect life. He gets things wrong. He's not even allowed in the promised land. After all that walking, he is not allowed into the promised land because of his doubt of God's providence. Before we get to the Matthew's gospel we've got today, if you actually read from chapter 1 to chapter 16, you actually see Matthew, the author, building a case and showing that this Jesus guy is a new Moses. He's a new Moses, a new Adam, a new King David even. But Exodus gives us the precedent. So theologians are looking back at that and going, okay, this is like the precedent for Jesus. It's like the thing that comes before, and Jesus comes along and he fulfills that. So that's how we understand why those readings are linked. And of course, you've got Paul in the middle there. Confusingly, Paul's writings are the youngest of those writings. He was writing at the later time, but he's in the middle there. Paul himself was a tent maker by trade. That's what he did as a trade. He was a tradie. But under the Pharisaical tradition, he was a Pharisee. And you know what the Pharisees were really good at? Law. They were all lawyers because they had to sit and interpret God's law. So Paul is a wonderful lawyer as well. And he actually says, something groundbreaking is happening with these precedents, you guys, that we are all one in Jesus Christ, which would have blown people's minds at that time because the law was for the Jewish people, and that was it. And then Jesus comes along as a new and better Moses and says, okay, well, instead of parting the Red Sea and bringing certain people to the promised land, I'm going to part the sea of sin and bring everybody who follows me to the promised land. I didn't make this up. I didn't make up this idea of how Jesus saves the world. It was from Irenaeus of Lyon about 1500 years ago, who said, here's the thing with Christianity. The human story has gone wrong. Now, you all know that because you only got to turn the news on or look around you and you know that things aren't quite right. We don't treat each other well as humans. You know, something's off. And Irenaeus said that. He said, humanity was created with communion, the idea of communion with God, but through sin, through disobedience, through death, we're separated. So then God's answer to that isn't to punish someone else on our behalf. God becomes one of us. And by becoming one of us, Christ takes the human story into himself and lives it rightly. That's what they call recapitulation. That is how we understand when we follow Jesus, that's how he makes things right. All right, why am I telling you all of this? It's a bit nerdy today. I was enjoying myself writing this sermon, but I was like, actually, what's your point here, Reverend Kim? Well, like a good lawyer, I've been trying to build my case this morning. Maybe because I'm telling you this stuff because it is interesting. Maybe you've picked something up from it today. Maybe you have, maybe you haven't. That's okay. But my real purpose, my case, if you will, is something a bit bolder. It's a bit bolder. I get really tired of watered down Christianity. I really do. Watered down Christianity. Christianity is 2,000 years old. It's got philosophy. It's got history. It's got textual criticism. It's got law. It's got mysticism and ethics and poetry. It's not a greeting card. You know, a greeting card is something you get that is sentimental and it's flat and you eventually throw it away, you know, unless you want to have a drawer full of greeting cards. Christianity is a cathedral. It's an All Saints singleton. It's something you can come to and inhabit for decades and still discover stuff you haven't seen before. But the really important thing is, if you walk into All Saints Singleton, you don't have to understand the construction history or the engineering or how people put this magnificent building together to enjoy it, do you? Like, I don't know. I don't know anything about building. Thankfully, I have wardens that do. But I don't know anything about that. I don't know about stonemasonry. I don't know about how they did the beams in the roof, how the lighting is arranged, how they make stained glass. But gee, I walk in here and I go, wow, there's something of the glory of God in this place. So I don't want you to worry if you can't remember some of the specifics of today's sermon. There's no test when you get to heaven, you know, at the front gates going, all right, who's Irenaeus of Lyon? They're not going to ask you that. They are going to ask you if you follow Jesus. And you're going to say, yes. Yes, I did. Because what we need, friends, is confidence that this faith that we have is not bland. It's not bland, it's robust. I tell you, if Christianity was designed to make me feel good and had no substance, I wouldn't follow it. And I certainly wouldn't lead a church. This is the faith. And that's what I want to leave you with today, is that confidence that this religion can hold up to the best cross-examination and has done so for 2,000 years. We see it in that gospel where Jesus says, I will build my church on this rock of St. Peter, and nothing will prevail against it. Friends, know that in your hearts this week, that you are part of this magnificent inherited tradition that is way more than a feel-good exercise, Christianity is real, it is life-changing, and it is very much worth following. Amen.